This build is based around summoning as many SRS as possible and having them explode as quickly as possible, and reducing their life and minion damage to deal as much damage as possible. There are two new things this league which enable this: the negative value calendar reflection rings and the new rune enchantments. We use negative minion resistance on rings to make the SRS die very quickly from Infernal Legion's self-fire damage, and we use the rune enchantment on one-handed axes which says trigger a socketed fire spell on hit every 0.25 seconds, which allows us to summon SRS, since it's got both fire and spell tags. So for double damage, we duplicate this trigger with Saboteur's Triggerbot notable. We use a one-handed axe along with Squire for damage, and Cyclone for fast hits to trigger the summoning, along with Cast While Channeling support for activating support skills like Spirit Offering and Flammability. We actually steal Saboteur's Triggerbot notable using very cheap Forbidden Flame Flesh Jewels, since Trickster offers us much better defenses and gives us ES Leech, which sustains both our defenses and mana costs. In my current version of the build, you can see it murdering the Minotaur boss, where I'm summoning over 8 SRS a second and they explode for about 800k damage each, giving around 6 million DPS on a very comfortable one-button build. Though in this map, the 38% reduced extra damage from critical strikes mod means that this is more like 4 million DPS right now. So let's take a look at the current state of the build. On the tree, we want minion life and minion damage for offense, so that is given to us mostly from this timeless jewel. Increased damage, increased max life, max life, max life from the anoint. We also get minion critical strike multiplier because the SRS of enormity always crit, and we get a little bit of attack speed on the way to this minion life wheel to help trigger the spell more often. Defensively, we focus on energy shield, spell suppression, and spell block capped, as well as mind over matter. We obviously have to take minion instability, and we need to take Eldritch Battery to sustain the mana costs, since each SRS costs around 135 mana, or energy shield, and since we're summoning over 8 of them per second, mana regen simply can't keep up. To that end, we also take Zealot's Oath along with Vitality to give us a lot of flat energy shield regeneration. So why are we Trickster instead of, Saboteur? Well, Trickster gives us a lot of defensive help. We get a lot of flat energy shield from Escape Artist, we get a lot of flat suppression from Spellbreaker, we get a lot of energy shield leech from Soul Drinker. And Swift Killer is a sneaky one. We don't care about the frenzy charges, we actually just care about the 200% increased charge duration, because on the body armor we gain an endurance charge every 15 seconds, and since they last 3 times as often, you can see I have 3 up for 30 seconds all the time. For jewels, I use obviously the 2 Forbidden Flame and Flesh jewels to steal the Saboteur's Perfect Crime node. I use the Timeless Jewel to get all the powerful minion nodes, and also to get Supreme Ostentation. It is very hard to get, 146 Strength and 159 Dex when you can't really use your Ring and Amulet slots for stats. We also have a Watcher's Eye here, which gives us 28 energy shield per enemy hit while affected by Discipline. So this gives us a lot of ES regen. For gear, yeah, so really the gear is focused on making the minions die as quickly as possible, so we want the mirrored rings that have a very high roll or a very low roll for all elemental resistances on minions. This one has -70, and obviously it's counteracted a bit by the implicit. And this one has -48, but it also has the implicit that minions take 15% increased damage if the ring is in the right slot, which it is. These rings were kind of cheap, I think they're about a divine each. It doesn't have any resistances for me, or life for me, neither of those do. But that's kind of the price you pay for mirrored gear. You can't change it. For the amulet, we take Replica Dragonfang's Flight because levels on minions are huge, and this gives us +3 of them. It also gives us a little bit of elemental res, and some increased mana reservation, which is nice. Yeah, so I have a spreadsheet where I calculated how quickly the SRS will die with -63% all elemental res they have, and 15% increased damage taken. They die in 0.67 seconds. And since the SRS have a limit of 6, this is quick enough for them to die before I oversummon them. Because if I summon 7th SRS, it will overwrite an existing one without popping it. And we don't want that. The rest of the non-weapon gear is basically us trying to make up for resistances in life and suppression. This gear isn't uber... Well, I guess by other streamer standards it is pretty cheap, but for me it wasn't that cheap. It was a few divines, I think, to get it all together. Yeah, you want just a lot of spell suppression, a lot of life, a lot of resists. The Eldritch mods are really coming in handy. For example, here we can inflict fire exposure on hit, and then because we have this notable, we can take this mastery, which makes us apply even more exposure. The boots give us scorched ground while moving. Scorched ground applies a bit more damage to targets. For the body armor, we obviously gain the endurance charges, and then we also get physical damage from hits taken as lightning, and on the helmet we take physical damage as some fire. And we also have a bit more max life on there, but that honestly doesn't really matter compared to the other minion life scaling we get. The belt, again, is the only thing with chaos res on it. This could be better. This could be a crystal belt. Flasks, nothing special, just like Quicksilver, a bit more evasion. This is an interesting thing. I turn it on for bosses pretty much only because it covers full life enemies in Ash for 7 seconds on melee weapon hit, and covered in Ash makes things take 20% increased fire damage. It's okay. It's just an experiment. For the weapons, obviously we want Squire. It's great because, for one, it gives us spell block and like 33% attack block, but it obviously lets us support SRS with 3 more supports. And the weapon itself is pretty simple. All we really want is the enchant. Everything else is gravy. We want an Elder base so that we can support it with level 20 increased critical damage, because again, SRS of enormity, they always crit. So all crit multi is like 100% effective. This is a huge damage boost. It's basically like putting it in a... It's like having a 7-link. The hits can't be evaded is a key craft as well. You don't want to fuck around with accuracy on this build. It will be a pain in the ass, so just make your hits unavoidable, and it's great. I used a deafening essence of... No, I think Screaming Essence of Fear. Yeah, to get 70-odd% increased minion damage. The optimal version of this would use a deafening. They're also pretty cheap. I think they're only 2C each. That gives a lot of damage as well. That's great. And yeah, the supports are pretty normal. Minion life, empower. Increased AoE is just here for better clear, because my damage is perfectly fine for most things. Infernal Legion to make them die, and Elemental Focus awakened to give +1 level, and also just buttload more damage. The perfect version of this axe would have +1 to socketed gems and +2 to socketed support gems, which would give us +3 overall, because +2 goes to empower, so on and so forth. I want to use fresh meat, but the SRS don't die quickly enough. Because I'm not scaling their duration, they have a 5-second default duration, and fresh meat only applies for the first 10%, which is 0.5 seconds, and they die in 0.67, so it's not quite enough. if I had a better timeless jewel, I could anoint Enduring Bond, which would give 50%, no, 40% increased minion skill duration, which would enable fresh meat. That's another optimization. Oh, I guess while we're on the tree, this cluster jewel is basically a 35% increased effect, 10% increased minion damage jewel, along with some chaos res, and that's fine. The life regen is kind of incidental. When I get to this jewel socket, I will put in a Fortress Covenant, because the downside isn't a downside, and also doesn't apply when it's in cluster jewel sockets, and it's just 35 to 45% increased minion damage, which is great. In terms of the skills, we have Vitality for ES regen, Flame Dash for movement, Desecrate in case I need corpses on a boss, pretty much. Steel Skin and Convocation on automation. Convocation is used to make the Triggerbots stay closer to me, so that the SRS spawn closer to me. Steel Skin is just defense. Frost Shield, also a bit more defense if I need it in a pinch. Haven't needed it that much. Discipline for a bunch of Energy Shield, and also the Watcher's Eye. Tempest Shield for for spell block cap. Grace for a bit more evasion, and then Cyclone is using faster attacks to hit faster and trigger things nicely in accordance with the cooldown breakpoints. And Cast While Channeling is just a convenience thing. I could add more other stuff to this, like Cull support, and if I bothered to get a 6th link, I would get also Infused Channeling for a bit more defense. But for now, for convenience's sake, we're using Cast While Channeling with Flammability and Spirit Offering. So, yeah. And as the POB shows, we're about 843k damage per pop, and that's with increased AoE, which provides no damage whatsoever. Awakened increased AoE would give a bit more damage. Conk Effect would do a lot more damage. Like, this can be way bigger. Overall, the build feels pretty great. It can be a bit one-hitty against chaos damage. I do need to fix that. I would like to fix chaos res somehow. A better timeless jewel for more minion damage. More cooldown on the boots. Cyclone and a 6th link so that I can use add infused channeling. 3 minion crit grand spectrums would be fantastic. But I have very few jewel sockets left, because I need, well, 2 for Forbidden Flesh Flame, the Eternal Timeless, the Watcher's Eye, so, yeah. And I'd really like to craft my own reflected rings, which have, you know, life for me and resistances for me, as well as minion life and minion negative resistance. And the better one-handed axe with plus to level of socketed gems. With all those things, I'm pretty sure you could get over 2 million damage per SRS pop, and don't forget you're summoning 2 of them at once. And the damage penalty from Triggerbots doesn't apply, because it's not a spell damage thing, it's a life, like the damage scales off their life. So, yeah. You can get 2 million per pop, and with the increased cooldown, you could get close to summoning 10 of them per second. So you'd have 20 million DPS pretty easy if you put more money into it. But yeah, it's a really cool build. In terms of, I didn't level this character as this build, I leveled it as another thing. The most expensive thing is this craft, because it costs 4 power runes, the triggering a socketed fire spell. You can steal the Triggerbot thing whenever you want, there is no level requirement for it, but you do need, like, rings that have a buttload of negative elemental resistances for minions, and you need, well, a squire isn't necessary, but, like, I guess that's the bare minimum thing you need, and I guess they don't have particularly high level requirements, so I guess you could kind of start doing this pretty early in a build, and I imagine it would actually crush pretty hard. The Elder Axe isn't necessary, you could just get a normal axe, but then you'd have to recraft the enchantment onto another axe, which would cost you another 24 divine, so probably don't do that. I think the axe would be a limiting factor if you were leveling this. But to be fair, leveling a Trickster or a Saboteur is probably pretty easy these days, and you can just swap to this after the campaign. Yeah, no, this is an awesome build. It can take on tier 16s, which has never happened for a self-made build for me. And yeah, I think it could... I don't know if it could ever do tier 17s, but there's certainly a lot more room for this build to grow. So yeah, let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the build.